and welcome to the show with me, Jillian Godsil. Today, I'm delighted to have as my guest Marieke Flament, who is the CEO of Near Foundation. Marieke, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, Jillian, thank you so much for having me on the show.
We were just saying before I pressed the record button, can't believe we haven't met before. We have so many people and things and Web3 in common. So it's a great honor for me to be here because I've been following your progress. It's wonderful to see a woman founder, so high profile, such an innovative ecosystem and all the stuff you're doing. So I'm looking forward to this conversation very much indeed. So maybe we go back to your earlier career. Tell me just a bit about how you got to this, how you got to Web3 perhaps.
Yes, so my first steps into Web3 were actually end of 2015. At the time, I was working at Expedia for hotels.com, and I got a call from a headhunter who was telling me about a Bitcoin startup. And I thought, okay, wrong number. I'm not working for drug dealers, because at the time, in my mind, anything related to Bitcoin was just, what you were reading on, on bad things happening, right? That was the headlines at the time. Anyway, long story short, but I ended up actually picking up the call and investigating, and that was to work for Circle. And so I was actually extremely blessed to have the unique opportunity to work with Jeremy Allaire for 4 years and to be at the forefront and the first seat, but also working with someone who is a visionary, right? Someone who actually connects the dots in many, many different ways in crypto. And so that's how I started my journey into, back then it was Bitcoin, then it evolved into blockchain, then actually now it's, Web3, whatever we call it, all of that is part of the same environment.
So that's a really blue chip entry into Web3.
Yes, indeed. You could call that a blue chip entry, but at the time it was, who knew that this was going to be blue chip, right? Because when I joined, it was still quite small. I think it was 50 or 60 people, maybe a couple of millions raised, and still the same vision of how to make money move more like we know on the internet, but nothing of the growth that has come actually after that.
Yeah, and you were early as well, I suppose, as well. So then tell me, there's not 20 people who are founders of their own blockchain. So that's kind of a big boast, a big jump. What was your vision and how did you have the audacity to go ahead and do it?
Yeah, so I'm not a founder, right? So I'm the CEO of the Near Foundation, but I'm not a founder of Near. The founders of Near as a blockchain are Alex and Ilya. And so their first idea was actually an AI company. And the idea was the name is Near because actually singularity is near. It comes from the very famous book. And the idea was to say, imagine a program to which we can ask to create any other application or website or whatever is out there. And to do that, they had actually freelancers all around the world. And to pay those freelancers, they had heard about blockchain and they thought, okay, we're going to use blockchain to pay people around the world. And then they discovered very quickly that it was not very fast and actually very expensive. And so they went back to the drawing board and they did a first pivot, which was to say, okay, blockchain is not what we thought it was. And so what would be a very good blockchain? How would that work? And they interviewed like tens of different blockchains out there. It's actually a very famous YouTube whiteboard series in which you can see Alex and Ilya interviewing every blockchain there is out there and actually trying to understand what are the good bits and the bad bits, right? What works and what doesn't. And then they created actually Near as a layer one, stitching all the best bits, which is why to this day, Near is probably the most user-friendly for developers, for end users, the most scalable blockchain there is out there because it's been thought through with like lots of different bits and pieces. So that's how it started. And it's been, so I joined Near Foundation in 2022. To actually help further grow the ecosystem, but to specifically take care and look after the mandate of the foundation, which is threefold. We help raise awareness of Near. We help grow the ecosystem in a sustainable fashion because the idea is that the ecosystem needs to be self-sustained and doesn't need actually to have a foundation of very large actors. And the third part is we work on everything related to decentralization and also governance and linked to that. I think you can always link governance to regulation. So that's the third pillar of what we do.
Okay, so yes, I attributed a big part the foundation of Near Foundation. Apologies. Tell me a bit. So, would your mandate for your foundation would that be common to most foundations that are out there, or is do you have specific visions for your foundation?
No, I think it's actually quite common to have crypto foundations that play a role. Then of course every ecosystem in blockchain has its own view of what the remit exactly of a foundation is. So I don't think there's anything very different or particular. At the end of the day, when you start with an ecosystem and you have technology, what you need on it is like an ecosystem. And so it's almost like thinking, well, you need certain roads and bridges and certain things that are built so that the ecosystem can thrive on it, right? So I don't think there's anything specific, but more like a general need for having it. For example, you could look at Ethereum Foundation. Now it's like obviously the Ethereum ecosystem is further advanced, so it has grown a lot, and so the role of the foundation has evolved, right? Which is the same for Near. Like the Near Foundation's role evolve as the Near ecosystem evolves.
So one of the big things for any ecosystem is to have lots of applications developed on it. How are you helping onboard developers and people? I mean, because it's a very technical blockchain, has very good credibility in its tech. How are you onboarding developers?
Yeah, fantastic question. So to thrive, the ecosystem needs indeed very good developers who are coming and who are interested in building. And we have today actually in the ecosystem a hub that is called Dev Hub. It's fully open source, and the idea is that any person can contribute to make proposals, and then those proposals can be voted upon for then being developed and eventually being rewarded. So that's one whole element of that. Today, also, when you go on near.org, you have the first fully decentralized website, and you can actually create not only pieces of code, but also content, and you can engage on that. That is a mega platform for growing developers, which might not necessarily be, the exact same type of developers as we would see, for example, contribute to the protocol or contribute to the core infrastructure, because those developers might be more contributing to creating widgets and different dApps and applications. But that's another mega pipeline of help for growing developers. And then I would say it's not just about developers, it's also about founders and building and having great teams in the ecosystem. And so on that, we've been on a journey, because in 2022, we were doing much more grants. I think a lot of people in crypto were doing grants, which is a good way to accelerate and to make sure that you can kickstart off and have people building interesting things. What we're evolving into now is much more hand-holding. So we have, for example, a platform called Near Horizon, which is a platform as founders, you can list your project, you can have access to fractionalized work from if you need CFOs or legal or whatnot, and you can also have access to backers and funding. And that's been an evolution, because what we see is that it's not just capital that project needs. Capital is not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is sometimes it's knowledge, sometimes it's actually access to certain resources, right? So those are the two concrete things that we do for basically growing developers, but also projects.
So, I mean, my second question from that was going to be, obviously you want tech on there, you want projects, then you need profile of things that people can use and see in marketplaces and NFT marketplaces. So how are you encouraging the mass adoption of that whole idea of making Near accessible and visible to other people?
Yeah, fantastic question. So mass adoption, I think, is something that is fundamental, right? Today, if you look in crypto, you have a lot of different silos and actually different sub-communities, and it's still very technical. It's actually still very difficult to get onboarded into anything. So step number one is to make sure that onboarding into Web3 and whatever application or dApp is, it's seamless. And recently we released what we call fast auth, and it's easier to onboard on Web3 than it is even in Web2. Right? You put your email address, it auto-generates a proposal for a name of wallet. If you don't like it, you can change it, and then you're in it, right? So that the onboarding phase remains extremely important. The usability remains very important. But more than that, actually, two other things are needed for mass adoption. One is rising above this click that we have at the moment, because we have, the click of this ecosystem and the click of that ecosystem. So this, the end users doesn't care. They don't care whether it's, is it built on that layer one and another layer one. What the end users care for real mass adoption is what does it do? Is it meaningful to me? Does it solve something that is truly different? So that's one thing. So therefore, we've been evolving into a blockchain operating system, which transcends this idea of it's not about, that ecosystem or that ecosystem. It's about actually how things work holistically and how simple they can be for users. And the last point is, on which we do a lot of efforts, is actually, look, there are billions of users today in Web2, and there is couple of tens of millions in Web3. And the reality is that if you're going to go mainstream, there is no way around figuring out how to get Web2 onto Web3. And so we do a lot of effort on that. We have a lot of key strategic partnership with large brands, with very, very strong Web2 teams that are thinking or that want to actually start experimenting into what does Web3 look like for them. And we see that as a good way to get through, in particular, loyalty as a use case, as a mega use case, because you can put so many things under it. But loyalty is something that, because it needs seamlessness for end users, something at which Near seems to be very well set up for in terms of tech stack.
I see on Twitter there's a lot of the BOS, the blockchain operating system. Is that what you're talking about? Your second point? I've that's caught my eye. I thought, I wonder what that is. So okay, that's interesting. So then tell me, I also, what caught my eye recently too as well, your second year of Changemakers, advocacy for women. So tell me why is that important, and how are you helping that advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, before starting to record, we were both talking about the importance of having actually diversity and inclusion. And in particular, I think in tech in general, I think in finance in general, but I think just, overall, when I look at blockchain, which is a fundamental technology that has the potential to change a lot of things, to me, we all put our biases in the work we do, like it's natural. But if you don't have, therefore, a very large representation of the world as it is today into building the technology of the future, then we are heading for a catastrophe, because then we are heading for things that are taking out an entire part of the population. And so at the core and the heart, that's why, in particular to me personally, diversity and inclusions matter. I've done I studied in computer science engineering, and I've always been surrounded or in environments where actually women are the minority. And so I've lived through that, but I see day in, day out, like the differences it makes to have actually, balanced team, and also teams who speak different languages, because the reality is that, not everybody speaks English. And when you have to defer to a common denominator, like, what does it really mean, right? And so Changemakers, therefore, it's an initiative we started for the first time last year around NearCon. And the idea was very simple. It was to say, well, to actually, you can't be what you can't see, and therefore, like, let's shine a light on role models wherever they are, whichever ecosystem they're working on. But like, let's shine a light actually on the work that many incredible women are doing in the space, because that can help inspire other women to join on and to go through. And so we did that for the first time last year around NearCon. And I also so it was hugely successful, but also NearCon in itself was, a crypto event that was very, very diverse. Like, we had, I think it was 76 different countries represented, 38% of women. And so just the sheer diversity you had in that group was phenomenal for that. And I think having initiatives like Changemakers can further help that. The number of time I think there's not a week when I don't hear that, women are attracting other women, and therefore, people from different countries are attracting people from different countries. So that's this whole snowball effect that is very important. And so this year, it's the second time we're doing Changemaker as an initiative, which is enabling us to share, shine a light on even more women and even more role models. And I think it's fantastic. When I saw the list of finalists, I was like, wow, this is actually incredible, right? Like, this is a way. And so I think it's doing, what are the little things that we can do to basically constantly help, raise the voices of those who are, different, and therefore making a change, and therefore are very important role models for anyone out there who's thinking of joining the space.
It's interesting, when I went through the Changemakers for this year, I found I knew most of them, because it's a very small little sector, but it is hugely important. And interesting, I was interviewing somebody recently who went from being a lawyer to heading a very tech engineering team with an NFT marketplace. And she had one piece of advice, which I thought was very good, because previously I'd always say, if you want to get into Web3, what do you do in Web2 or whatever? Just bring it over. People need solicitors and lawyers and, data science, but whatever it is you do, come and bring it. But she had an even better piece of advice, I think. She said, change your CV now, and make it more appropriate to Web3. So whatever the skills that you have, emphasize the Web3. I thought, whoa, because it's one thing wanting to get across the road, but unless you've got a pedestrian crossing, how do you actually make it through the traffic? And I thought, that's a nice idea. Change your CV first, and then send it out, see what happens. As it happened, her break-in was, because she was a lawyer originally, she got a job doing with Web3 doing analytics on with the legal system. So she'd half the side anyway, but she didn't know anything about analyzing stuff, but she learned. She said, I'm smart, I can learn. So she did. So that's really cool. I think it's amazing. Tell me, do you then worry, we're all based in Europe at the moment, but you worry about what's happening in the US and about that big, like, I don't know, like hammer hitting with in terms of the regulation. And I mean, we all know regulation is important because people don't want to get scammed. They want to get rid of all the oil snake salesmen, snake oil salesmen. But how do you feel? Do you feel comparing the US maybe with the EU approach? Do you have any feelings on that?
Yeah. Well, so I think what I find fascinating is that we're seeing geopolitics play out in grand scheme here, right? Because what we're talking about here is like technological innovation. And that's the core of the theme here. And what we're seeing is like very different approaches. So you have the US approach, you have the European approach, and then actually you have Asia, which I think so many incredible things are happening in Asia, which sometimes get overlooked or not fully understood. And that is like, it's, at macro play, I think that's fascinating because at the core and the heart of a lot of what actually blockchain and crypto can do is change the way money moves around, change, of course, the way information moves around and the way collectibles move around, but ultimately there is a financial value to that. And so I think it's very interesting to see the different approaches being taken by different markets, and therefore what it means for the future. And what it means for the future is a couple of things, right? One is actually, what does it mean for talent? Because we're already seeing it. Like, talent in particular in tech is very fluid and very mobile. And so we are, there's been a couple of things that have made headlines, but from venture capitals moving some of their teams into, Europe or Europe-based countries, from actually, teams fully relocating and saying, okay, now we'll make our new base here, from actually, new things and new projects that are popping up also in the East, right? So I think the core question on that is more, what does the future look like? Now, you said it, regulation is important because it protects end users and consumers and businesses and so on and so forth. The thing is, though, blockchain technology is, for most part, permissionless, and it's open source, and it's unstoppable. And I think having that in mind when designing regulation is very important, because when you're in an environment like that, ideally you'd want to have a regulation that's worldwide, but there's not a centimeter of planet Earth that doesn't follow the same thing. There's something that's consistent worldwide. But because of what I mentioned earlier, actually that's not what's happening. It's like it's used as a tension of under economical further forces. So I think all of that is obviously fascinating. Now, as an ecosystem, NEAR has been actually much more European-centric from the start, and actually much more also Asia-centric from the start. So we, in that sense, we are quite, global and very diverse already. Now, does it mean that, for the many projects that we have that are actually US-based, of course, a lot of them have, questions, and what does it mean? Can they still operate? Should they still operate? Should they go somewhere else? Should they relocate most of their teams, right? So those questions are ongoing. But yeah, but I think it is definitely fascinating to me. It's a broader movement for macro things that are actually at play.
Unstoppable, I think, is a good word that you use, that it's very hard to regulate the unstoppable. So finally, without wishing you to ask you about your favorite children, could you pick out any apps or people in the NEAR ecosystem that we should all follow or have a look at?
Well, I would say the one thing to follow and have a look at is what we call the blockchain operating system, which the visible version of it is actually near.org. And so if you go today on near.org, you can, seamlessly sign up and seamlessly start playing out and actually seeing what interacting with the fully Web3 websites look like. I think this one is definitely one to check. And then for others, we've done quite a lot of work with, I think, experiences that are quite seamless, and in particular in again this loyalty and sports area, there is a lot. I'll give you an example. Sweatcoin is an app. You can basically walk and you get your tokens. I think the onboarding into Web3 on that is quite seamless, and so that's something interesting, right? So for all people who are saying like, well, I don't read, like, where do I start? I think it's something interesting to look at. We recently announced a partnership with Cosmos AI, which is at the moment more based in Asia, but it's going to have similar feeling of like, you don't need to know what crypto is about to actually start engaging. So I'm quite a big fan of that type of, of use cases or things that make it seamless for users. But I would say, yeah, definitely near.org is probably the first place to go to.
I'm going to say I'm an OG with Sweatcoin. I was there at the very beginning. So I have loads of steps. It's not that I'm the most active person in the world, so I'm there for the longest time. No, fascinating. And actually, what I like about the Sweatcoin experience too as well, that onboarding to Web3 is very seamless. It's all on my phone. And if I didn't have to look at private keys and all the rest of it, it just worked. So a very clever way of just getting people on board. Well, Marieke, thank you so much for your time today. I love the fact that you're a woman in charge. Yay! Let's have more women out there doing good stuff, and diversity in general, of course. It's not just gender. And I think watch this space. I think Near Foundation, Near Ecosystems, a lot going on. Thank you indeed.
So much for this conversation. Thank you.